Speak No Evil is in theaters now, but should you watch the remake or the original? I'll break them both down right now. This video is brought to you by The Perfect Gene. Go to theperfectgene.nyc and use code DAN15 for a special offer, and stay tuned after the video for more info. Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell, here to talk about Speak No Evil, which is a big theatrical release this weekend. And you may not know this, but it's actually a remake of a movie that came out just a couple of years ago that was made in Denmark. And every time one of these remakes comes out, it's always the same question. Should I watch the remake or should I go back and watch the original? Now, I'm actually a fan of the original movie. I saw the new version last night, and so I want to break down both of them and give you my honest recommendation about which version, or both, or neither, that you should actually see. Now, optimally, I think the way to go into both of these versions is knowing as little as possible. The trailer for the new US version, for example, I think gives away way too much. So if you want to go into either version without knowing a whole lot, it's basically about two families who meet on vacation. One family agrees to go visit the other family, and then things take very interesting turns. And if you don't want to know anything else, then you can pause the video, you can go see either version, and then come back and watch this breakdown. But if you want to know a little bit more, I will talk about both versions of the movie. I won't give explicit spoilers as to what happens, but again, I think that it is probably best to go into this really without knowing anything that happens. So let's start with 2022's original Speak No Evil, which is a film out of Denmark from writer-director Christian Toftrup. I did see this movie back when it originally came out as part of the virtual Sundance Film Festival, and it was one of the standout movies of the festival and one of the standout movies of the year for me. It really did catch me off guard. In the original, a married couple from Denmark named Bjorn and Louise and their daughter Agnes meet a family from the Netherlands, Patrick and Karen, and their son Abel, while on vacation in Tuscany. The Dutch family invites the Danish family to their country home in the Netherlands, but things soon take a dark turn. Abel is a troubled young boy who was born with no tongue, which renders him unable to speak, but it's his parents' treatment of him that alarms Bjorn and Louise, as well as Patrick and Karen's unorthodox behavior and at times aggressive ignorance of their guests' wishes and comfort levels. Now, when I originally heard that Speak No Evil was getting an English language remake, even though the original is basically almost entirely in English already, my first question was why? What could you do to this movie other than making a carbon copy of the original that could in any way compare to it? But rewatching the first movie, as I did right before I watched the remake, I do kind of see why it was targeted to be made by a Hollywood studio, in this case, Blumhouse. Setting aside the fact that studios know that most moviegoers here in the US either aren't interested in or more commonly don't have access to international films, Speak No Evil, the original, is not really a Hollywood-type movie, including some twists in the third act that would, as William Shatner once put it, have audiences throwing rocks at the screen, which is pretty ironic when you think about it. So how can Speak No Evil be remade without fundamentally changing what it is and still making the kind of movies that audiences here in the domestic marketplace in the US would be interested in seeing? Well, the answer to that question is that you can't really do that. While the first two acts of 2024's Speak No Evil are at times a scene-by-scene remake of the first movie, the third act is completely different. It basically transforms into a typical Hollywood thriller, and I'm not, by the way, saying that as a negative thing about the movie. In 2024's Speak No Evil, which was written and directed by Eden Lake's James Watkins, Scoot McNairy and Mackenzie Davis play Louise and Ben Dalton, Americans who have unhappily relocated to London with their daughter Agnes. While vacationing in Italy, they meet Patty and Kira, played by James McAvoy and Aisling Franciosi, a carefree couple who invite the Dalton family to visit them in the English countryside. And as in the original, the couple's son Ant is also afflicted with an inability to speak. Now, this Speak No Evil is about 15 minutes longer than the original. The first two acts have some additions expanding the discomfort that the Daltons feel with their new hosts, but the third act is completely different. And while fans of the original film may cry foul at this, I am sympathetic to the viewpoint that the third act in the original movie just wouldn't work for the type of audience that this movie is trying to bring in. And when looking at these two movies, when comparing them to each other, I think the major basis of comparison is the third act because they are so different from each other. The original film's ending is more effective, I think, and lends the movie more power. The new version's ending is more exciting, but much less disturbing. And I really think that your personal preference and what you're looking for in a horror thriller like this is really going to guide your opinion toward either film. The casts in both versions are uniformly excellent, as the mercurial Patrick in the original version, Dutch actor Fedje van Hewitt, gives a quietly simmering performance like a guy with a secret that only he knows. If the remake were to have played the character in the same way with that same kind of energy, I could see Jeffrey Dean Morgan taking on the role instead of James McAvoy. But as the remake's Patty, James McAvoy shows some darker shades earlier in the movie. His version of the character is more on edge, more troubling, but also more disarming. He has a charm to him, and you believe him as a good guy who maybe just kind of wrestles with his dark side. He's also genuinely scary in parts of the film, and he brings a physicality to the role that they didn't really tap into in the original movie. In the spousal roles, we get some more departures than in the Patrick Patty character. Bjorn's wife, Louise, in the original, played by Sitzel Siem Koch, is a loving mother and somewhat bored wife who's the first to sense that something might be wrong with this weekend in the countryside. Koch gives a protective performance, but not one that signals anything other than watchfulness over her family. Mackenzie Davis's Louise Dalton is much more aggressive. She's not just kind of bored with her husband, she's frustrated by him and has been since long before the events in this movie. This gives her more of an edge and also a tendency not just to step in and help her husband, but to take on some of the roles that he probably should be filling himself, which is something we'll talk about shortly. Patrick's wife Karen in the original, who's played by Karina Smulders, is a bit of an enigma as a character. Is she a spouse who understands that she may have to smooth over her husband's rough edges from time to time, or does she know more than she's letting on? You don't really know until the very end of the film, and she doesn't betray much, and consequently, that means that she plays a little bit less of a role in the first movie than she does in this newer version. In the remake, Aisling Franciosi's Kira gets an enhanced role and a deeper backstory. We know what she knows and what her role is in what's happening much earlier in the film, and she's also given a deeper connection to the movie's events. I wouldn't necessarily say she's a stronger character, but her role recontextualizes a lot of what's going on in the movie and adds an element to the film that's not present in the first movie that's actually more disturbing than the original, and it's actually one of the only places I would say that the remake is more disturbing than the first film. I don't necessarily think that the role was as developed as it should have been, but the direction they took with her character helps to set this version of Speak No Evil apart from the first movie. I really have two big issues specifically with the remake, and the first one centers around Scoot McNairy's character, Ben. In the original film, his counterpart Bjorn was a man who's been beaten down by life. He sees in Patrick the kind of free-spirited, unrestrained life without boundaries that he's always wanted for himself, and that desire and frustration does lead to weakness in key moments, but I wouldn't necessarily say that he's a weak man. He's just somebody who is often weaker than the forces that he's up against. He's somebody who's easily manipulated, but is always trying his best to do the right thing. Ben, on the other hand, is almost comically weak. Nearly every action he takes in this movie is one of sheer incompetence, and his rare competent achievements are almost immediately undercut by another failure. There's no question that the power in this family lies with his wife, and there are some story adjustments for this remake that emasculate him even more. The original does a good job of showing how these are two very different men, but still allowing them to play a believable character, whereas in the remake, their strengths and weaknesses are heightened to an almost ridiculous degree. The sense of going bigger also speaks to my second issue, and it's particularly with the revised ending, which is that they give everything that's going on in this remake a very clear rationale. There's a reason why all of this stuff is happening, whereas in the original movie, it's summed up in one sentence that's just absolutely bone-chilling. That sentence is still in the English language remake, but they decided to surround it with a much more explanatory sequence that shows just exactly why everything that's been happening has been happening. A random occurrence of very bad things is to me much scarier than a clearly explained third act motive. And it's really the only place in this remake where the patented Hollywood dumbing down, I think, can really be detected. Maybe it's because this version didn't want to cross some boundaries that the original did that are really outside of Hollywood's comfort zone, because this movie is very similar up until a very distinct departure point. But whatever the rationale behind the decision to go deeper into the why behind it all, I think that that was not the best choice for the film. Generally, if you're interested in the story and you haven't seen either movie, or you've only seen one or the other, I think that they're both worth your time. Both versions feature strong performances, both versions contain effectively paid off sequences of horror and discomfort, and both versions invite you to think about what you would do if this happened to you. And I think that we've all had, to some degree, a version of The Weekend from Hell. I know what mine was. It was about 15 years ago. I was hanging out with a couple of friends, but we were hanging out with a friend of a friend who was just completely off the rails. We went to go get breakfast on Sunday morning, and he was like, you know what? Let's just go to Tijuana. And guess who was driving? Luckily, we got out of there pretty quickly and avoiding any of the myriad number of things that could go wrong with an impromptu trip to Tijuana. But I think about that weekend every time I see the original film and now seeing that second one, because things worked out okay that time. But what if you were in a situation over which you really didn't have much control, where things weren't going well? If I were to rate each version separately, I'd say that 2022's original Speak No Evil is a disturbing, nasty gut punch of a movie that will affect you more, but leave you feeling a lot emptier. Its more subtle characterizations and the fact that it invented everything that this remake does right would lead me to a low-grade See It Now rating with a troubling content warning. As far as 2024's Speak No Evil, it shares many of the same scenes, which are recreated effectively, and it has a more typical Hollywood ending that's still suspenseful and at least had me guessing, which you don't often see in a remake, but its more simplistic approach to some of the characters and an occasional trip into cliché puts it more solidly in the range of it's good on my personal scale, though I do have to praise James McAvoy for once again proving that he can be truly terrifying. Honestly, this is far from the worst case scenario that I imagined when I heard that Speak No Evil was getting a remake, because how many times have we seen an international film that just gets sucked into the Hollywood studio system and stripped of all of its brains and originality and just pumped out into theaters for a cheap, quick, easy payday? That's not the case here. And while I may have some issues with this year's Speak No Evil, I also have to acknowledge that when you're bringing someone or something in from another country, as the characters in both films learn, things could be a lot worse. So those are my thoughts on both versions of Speak No Evil. What do you think? Are you interested in seeing one or the other? Let me know down in the comments below. And before we go, I want to thank the sponsor for this video, The Perfect Gene. It's after Labor Day, the weather's getting cooler, and you're probably breaking out the long pants again, unless you're like me and you just wear them year round. That means it's the perfect time to try out The Perfect Gene. If you dread the fall because you have to put up with stiff, scratchy denim, you need to try out jeans from The Perfect Gene today. They fit you like they were made for your body, they stretch for a comfortable fit, and they look great. If I could wear mine every day, I would, but I have to wash them at least once a month, and honestly, I should probably wash them more than that, but I love them so much. The Perfect Gene also has a massive range of sizes from 26 to 50 in the waist and 26 to 38 in length, and 6 different fits, so you will absolutely find a pair of jeans that's perfect for you. I've never had a pair of jeans that fits this well. I usually have to choose between comfortable and too big or stylish and too tight, but now I can have both, and I love how they make me look and feel. It's honestly the best of both worlds. It's finally time to stop putting up with uncomfortable jeans by going to theperfectgene.nyc. Our viewers and listeners get 15% off your first order, plus free shipping, free returns, and free exchanges when you use the code DAN15 at checkout. That's 15% off for new customers at theperfectgene.nyc with promo code DAN15. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them, so please support our show and tell them that we sent you. F your khakis and get The Perfect Gene. Thanks to The Perfect Gene for sponsoring this video, and thank you for watching. Be sure to stay tuned right here for more movie news, reviews, box office, and more. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.